that's something else that I try to impress on the people that come with us. Hey, man, get your act together. Work hard. There are great results if you do the work. But no one's going to give you anything while you're sitting on your tuchus, man. Not the type of person that when I was 4 years old knew that they were going to become a lawyer. It was never like that for me. I remember I was maybe like 18, 19 years old, and I bought a phone from Circuit City. Back then there were no cell phones, there were no beepers, just had landline phones. And so I bought this really cool phone. I ended up paying was like $100 or like $90, which was expensive for me at the time. And it was a flip phone, and it was just so cool. I mean, it was awesome. And I get home, I used it for a week, and it broke. So I ended up taking it back, and they refused to refund it. I was so upset. I said, you know what? I'm putting a hex on you, number one. Number two, I'm going to law school so that this never happens again. That was when I really thought, you know what? I hate getting messed with. I hate getting screwed. I don't like being the little man. I don't like it. Fast forward, I go to college, and I'm a chef, basically, a culinary school. And that didn't work out too well because, trying to please people on a constant basis really didn't work out very well for me. So I decided basically at that point to end up going to law school, practiced for about 15 years. And I represented a gentleman who was undocumented and ended up getting a deal where his case should have been dismissed. And the judge refused to sign the dismissal. And I was so upset at that point that just because of who he was and his circumstances, I said, you know what? I can't let this stand anymore. And it was at that point I decided to become a judge, because in my mind, I saw the unfair practice of what was happening to defendants at the time. And so I went on a mission to do something about it. And so here we are. In my first day in law school, we had a professor that was just great, right? We used to make fun of him like crazy. But he said something that was so smart. He says, look, you are going to become a lawyer, and you're going to have a great time. You're going to love it, but you have to be careful. If you cannot turn it off, then you will be a very miserable and unhappy person. You'll be divorced because no one likes to argue with someone all the time, every time, and just constantly. It's nauseating. My wife gets so mad at me because why are you cross-examining me? I'm passionate, and I sometimes am so to my detriment as well, especially when I'm talking to my wife, and she'll let me know about it, and she'll put me in my place, and she's right. And so I'll say, look, I'm sorry, because you got to know when to stop. I've never been one to write policy. Those are like there's reps, like state reps, state senators, and those, they deal with a lot of policy, writing new laws. How do you change this and that? Me, I like the practicality approach. I don't know about necessarily a law, but I think what would be really cool is, what if they embedded steering wheels with like a scram monitor? You know how we put scrams on people's ankles, right? Determine whether they consume alcohol. Why not have that in a steering wheel? So the car, if it senses, right? Because interlocks, people blow into it. They may have someone else blow into it, because it takes your picture every time you blow. So people can fool it by, I have it here, you blow into it, and then it starts the car. Well, if you're going to drive the car, there's only one way, right? So you put your hands on the car. That'd be really cool. Let's say you get you get busted for driving on a suspended license. A lot of people will basically take what's called time served. They'll plead guilty to 1 day or 2 days in jail. They get credit for the time that they've done, and they walk out of jail. But anytime you plead guilty, usually it ends up as a conviction on your record, and there are other consequences that can arise from that. We don't want people who are not guilty to plead guilty. If you're guilty, okay. But if you're not guilty, don't plead guilty. That's why we have trials, or that's why we have other diversionary programs available as well. That's the name of the game, is we don't want you to plead guilty if you're not guilty. Don't. I don't know who's going to end up watching this, but if you've never been to jail, it's cramped. It smells god awful. There's no windows. You have no concept of time. There's no clocks. So you're basically sitting in a room
with like sardines overpacked, and it smells just, it's such an experience. I've been there just because we get to go through all the rigmarole, right? And I remember going once, in one corner you have someone who's urinating. In another corner, you have someone who's just getting sick. On another corner, you may have someone defecating. I mean, and you're all in this one place. It's such a sobering experience that you would think and you would hope that your one-time visit, it's enough to just really, you know, but
And I routinely tell people, hey, we're not here to punish and lock you up. Our main concern are two. Are you a danger to our public? Number one. Number two, are you going to continue? Learn from them. If you're here, learn from it. Let's move on. Now, if you show me that you're a dangerous person, I'm going to take the right response. Earlier today, geez, just, one of the biggest problems I have for me is the delay. I hate the delay because people, instead of getting the treatment they should, something gets delayed and they invariably end up doing something they shouldn't when treatment would have hopefully fixed that. I think that a lot of people get angry at us because we let too many people go. I've heard that time and again. And it's not about letting go. It's not letting go. No, it's making sure someone gets the message. And that's it.
can you imagine when you run for Congress, you're up for reelection every 2 years. Every 2 years, you're up for reelection. That means you're always out campaigning. Literally, I love my wife. I love my kids, and I like watching them grow up. I want to play Fortnite with my kid, man. I can't do that if I'm constantly on the road campaigning. Hell no, no.
My grandfather fell down the stairs. He broke his hip. So he gets into the ICU, and my wife was the person that was taking care of him in the ICU. So I met her in the hospital as she was taking care of my grandfather. Initially it wasn't even me; it was my mom. It's like the old every Jewish mother. Hey, over there, over there. Of course, just butting into everything, getting it, just like a typical Jewish mother, right? Kind of just hooked us up, and she's like an angel. I have a great support system too. My babushka, right? My mother-in-law, great. Just she's always willing to help here and there. I get caught up in trial, I get caught up in court, and then Elena, my wife, gets caught up somewhere. So she comes into the rescue and she's great. My folks help as well. I mean, I guess we just have it timed really well because it's literally on the go, boom, 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 always. But I guess I wouldn't have it any other way, right? Because then life gets boring. I like being on the move. For me, my day starts at 5 in the morning. I get up early because that's the only time I can go run. So I get up early, I go on my run, I come home. I'm gonna get home at what? 6:05? No, 7:05. I jump in the shower. I get 4 kids ready for school in the morning. I take my youngest son and my daughter first. They got to be at school at 7:30, and then 7:45. I get them, come back, take the other two to school. They're there by what, 8:15. So then I run to court, come back, and then I got to go get the other one at 3. And then after school stuff, gymnastics, drama, whatever it may be. But it's great because otherwise life would be boring. At some point, they're all going to get grown. They're all going to be out on their own. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do with myself. I guess we're just more Fortnite, just Fortnite all day, all night. And another thing is I'm an avid video gamer. I'm a big gamer. My son and I, we like to game a lot. We have a couple video game machines. It's fun for my friends to come over, or not my friends, but his friends to come over, play video games and do a lot of the things that they can't normally do at home. If they want to go out, have a good time, I want them to come to me. I have a close relationship with my kids, and I want their friends to be our friends so they feel comfortable hanging out with us, and I'll make them food, and I want to be the party house where they all come over here.
Every one of our staff members, we get along. We've got a great relationship. Even so, with the prosecutors, with the defense lawyers, we all have a great relationship. And I think it starts with us. We're happy people. We like what we're doing. We're not miserable SOBs that just detest them. Why the hell am I here? No, when I have someone asking me something that's just so far out of left field, out of whack, I may laugh because I think it's just, how can you even ask that? God, I mean, I've been burnt. I get thrown into the grease or in the fire because I may laugh at something when I'm not really laughing at a person. I'm laughing at the situation that's just so incredulous that I'm like, well, I never, ever, never will ever make fun of someone. I will never begrudge a lawyer for zealously advocating for their client. Likewise, a prosecutor who's zealously advocating for the state. I'm never going to begrudge you for doing what you're supposed to be doing, you know? But if you come at me and I may laugh, but don't take it as sign of disrespect. I'm just, hey, no.
And I asked this question the other day in open court, and someone had a response for me, but is Mr. Beast real? He boasts, hey man, you subscribe here, you could win $1 million. You could come on this show. You can do this. You do that. Is it real? Is it? My son swears by it. He just loves Mr. Beast. And I'm like, come on, really? Swears that's the greatest thing ever. And it's real. Look, let's subscribe, Dad. We can be on it. And I'm like,
even if you don't become a lawyer, the amount of information that you learn from going to law school, I know that there's too many lawyers as it is, but just do it. If you treat the law well, it will pay you back in dividends. You know, it's a great profession. And so I would wholeheartedly encourage anyone that's considering it, do it. 100%.
yeah, I think that probably the biggest thing is the theory that I apply with my family. I like to get along with people. I don't like to fight. I don't like the drama. And I like to be everybody's friend, but you can't do that with your kids, right? You can't do that with the court system. If you try to be everybody's friend, then people are going to just take advantage of you. And when I first started out as a judge, I was trying to, just be happy, be everybody's friend, and I got taken advantage of a lot. When you have kids, you have to be the parent. You got to know when to say no. You got to know when to say yes. You can't just say no all the time because that serves no purpose. You have to say yes a lot, but you have to say no as well. And it's the same thing with the judge. I get people that try to take advantage all the time, and not defendants. I'm talking about attorneys. For example, I'll have someone, they've never been to court before, right? And they're asking, someone will come up to me asking, hey man, can we just waive the appearance? They don't have to be here, and I don't know anything about the case. I don't know it's a first appearance, and they don't tell me. And normally I would say, yeah, sure. I guess we don't need him. And then I find out later, well, what? It's a first appearance? I haven't even heard probable cause. We're required to do probable cause in every case, right? That's the initial setting where we find out what happened. Is there enough evidence to go forward? If there is, are you going to put any conditions on it? Something like that. As much and as nice as you want to be, you have to be careful. You just can't be. And initially, that was not my view. I wanted to, and so you can't be friends with everyone. You have to know when to be someone's friend and to really be the adult over that, because I don't like to fight with people. I don't like the drama. I don't need it.
When I was younger, I wasn't one that had much patience, but as you go through life and you develop experience and you develop knowledge and you develop, and I guess you obtain obligations and kids and wife and work, and you try to balance all that, it teaches you patience, right? And then now becoming a judge, holy moly, if you don't have patience, then this is not the gig for you, because it's really difficult, because day in, day out, you see a lot of the same thing, and you hear a lot of the same excuses. And if you're not one to really sit down, part the sea, and delve into a situation, but most importantly, have patience, because if you don't, you might miss the actual goal because you're so upset and you're ready to just throw the book at someone and just throw them in jail or do something else that's drastic. You might really miss what the issue is. Instead of actually figuring out what the problem is, you may be doing more harm than good. Whereas if you figure out, take time, delve into their lives or whoever's life to figure out what the underlying issue is, that may save them from even having to go to jail in the first place. By and large, for me, the most valuable trait that I've learned, I think, is patience. It's having patience, developing patience, and keeping patience. Who knows how long I'm going to be here, but for as long as I can, I'm going to try to do as much as I can, and that's me.